Seth, good morning. Good Friday morning.
Good Friday morning ahead of a long weekend for me, at least. So it's very good. How about yourself? How are
I,
you
I
feeling?
tell you, I kind of like these morning sessions. Yeah, I wake up, I cancel all my work meetings, stuff that makes money, and I love to get on here and be like, it's like playing hooky. Like, yeah, man, I'm going on D side today.
It's true. It's a little bit of a break from reality, and we usually do it at night. I'll light some candles, set the mood, and this is a little more. It feels, like you said, it feels like a nice break from the day, and gets us at our sharpest, I think. So
Yeah.
hopefully the material feels like it delivers on that. But I'm happy to be here as well on this lovely Friday morning.
And I got to tell you, now that I'm in celebrity dense zone here in Los Feliz, my new friend is Kevin Bacon, dude. I see that dude all the time lurking at Albertsons. I figured out the guy shops exactly the aisles that I do. Apparently, he buys private label too. I watched him.
I mean, considering his isn't Kira Cedric like a billionaire too, his wife? So I don't know
Yeah,
if he needs to, but he's a man of the people. Always has been that bacon.
it's a man. It's funny. We were crossing the street and at a stop sign, and a lady leans out. Hi, Kevin. And I didn't know who he was at first. And I look, and I'm like, oh shit, man, there he is, the man.
And worth mentioning on this podcast as the lead singer of the Bacon Brothers band. So there is a musical connection here as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll get him on the show.
Oh,
As
that
as
our first major celebrity get would be
as
Kevin Bacon.
as,
That'd be
as we're
something.
shopping for frozen private label pizza.
I would say the
Uh,
interview is just you following him around the grocery store,
yeah,
asking him questions.
exactly, man.
I like it.
But no, all good. And I got to tell you, I was cracking up this morning as I'm researching our topic here, which are stories behind band names. And you and I have had this listed as a topic for us, but somehow we've just kind of been pushing it back. But I got to tell you, I'm super pumped because I want to share some of these stories because they're so ridiculous, dude.
It makes you realize over time, like, I mean, this is like maybe obvious to say, but there's so, when in the 60s there weren't that many bands, so it was, you
Yep.
could kind of be anything, the anythings, the whatever. There was also not the internet where you can see what else is out there,
Yep.
so the process is a little more straightforward. And I think 50, 60 years of bands coming and going has forced people to get real creative, and so some of the inspirations for these names are hilarious. It was fun research to do.
Yeah, I tell you, it's you grow up with these names and they mean so much, right? And then when you learn the history of like how they made the name, sometimes it's like literally they saw it on a sewing machine. They're like, yeah, all right, let's do that.
Yeah.
It's like it almost like you don't want to hear it because you're like, that was it. That was the genius behind
It's like
this.
the never meet your heroes idea where it's like, if it sounds cool, don't question it. 100%.
Exactly. Do not know where it came from. And then you'll just have this, how do I say, imagination is always stronger than reality.
It's
I
funny you
mean,
say that, Scott. I did not tell you this before the podcast, and I kind of forgot it. I have a shared text group with 3 or 4 friends where if we see something that sounds like a band name, we add it to this group. So I've got a list of like 50 fake band names on my phone that are all inspired by, like,
oh,
there's like like I was going by this place near my house
yeah,
called, it was a Ukrainian social club, and I
yeah.
was like, that's a good name, Ukrainian. So we keep all
Dude,
these random names in a communal notes. Maybe I'll fire some off at the end of the episode, but I've if I ever start a band, I've got a lot of options to work
that
from.
I like that one. I only have one. I only have one, and I've never formed a band, but I almost want to form a band so I can call it this. Can I tell you?
Hit me.
Live on Brown Pegasus.
I can already see the kind of music that they're playing. It's probably a little Dio-ish. That's my thought. But that sounds about right. That's a
Yeah,
Scott
yeah.
ass band name.
And I just the logo I created. I'll share it. You know what? I'm going to share it on our social media.
I was
You
gonna
can
say,
see
if only we had the channels to spread the gospel about Brown Pegasus.
But speaking about naming, here's Seth in my research. I found the process so random yet so relatable. And for this, I know Seth and I worked for many years for a large corporation, and a lot of our job was creating names for products. And they almost use a lot of the same processes because you have to trademark it, right? So we create a name, go to the lawyer, and they'd be like, nope, you can't use it.
Yep.
It's already been used.
Yep. Or something close enough was used in China in this thing 10 years ago. And it's like, oh, shit. And actually, I would say a common theme among our research is that a lot of the bands we looked at had other names, oftentimes
Yeah.
many other names. It's very
Oh, yeah.
rare for a band to come into existence, pick a name, and stick with it forever. Because,
Yeah.
like you said, oftentimes, when you're a million record selling band is one thing, but when you're like a band that just came together, we might play a couple coffee shops, we may play one show. You're
Yeah.
not being as forward thinking about naming, and so oftentimes there's an evolution as they like get more popular or famous. They're like, before we hit the big time, we better rethink this goofy name that was a placeholder
Yeah.
6 months ago or a year ago. So a lot of changing, and sometimes the origin of the why is even more interesting than the name itself. So we'll jump into that for sure.
Definitely. And as we've seen throughout the history of, especially in rock music, I would say nomenclature or the structure of the actual names has changed. Where you had like for example, you had the Beatles, the
The
Rolling
Kinks,
Stones.
the
Yeah.
Rolling Stones. It was the blanks. And at that point, again, there weren't a lot of rock bands that had preceded them. So kind of everything was open season. You could be the anythings, and
Yeah.
and two things. Number one, there were few enough bands that it didn't matter. And number two, even if there was another band, there wasn't a way to like communicate. Oh, there's a band. We're in Liverpool. There's a band in Manchester with the same name. But unless either of us gets bigger than our city, we're never going to cross paths anyway. So who cares? There's probably names where there's like 50 bands in the United States that all suck with the same name, right?
Yeah.
That's definitely the thing. Yeah.
For sure. And I thought it was interesting, especially when you saw the trends change and how bands didn't want to seem like the previous generation or even the previous year as the trends started to not only change, but you just didn't want to be associated with something that was yesterday. So even the band, if you lasted over a decade, your name almost could be seen as unhip, just in terms of its structure.
Yeah.
And I obviously, if we come back to our favorite, the Beatles had that with Sergeant Pepper's, because in San Francisco at the time, there was this movement towards this new way to call your group.
Yeah. They talk about it a little bit in The Last Waltz, and they talk about all the bands where, like, that's where like W.S. Walcott's Medicine Show came from. It was all these weird like jug bands that had super long names, Country Joe and the Fish, and like just it was how weird and long and like psychedelic can you be. So there are these like you said, these cycles of consistent style. Then I think in the 80s it was more like short and sweet, Squeeze, those kind of bands. Like the tide shift in what used to be cool is now the opposite. And so it's like a reaction, a pendulum to what was cool before. How do you differentiate yourself from the bands who came before you?
Yeah. And then you had in the 90s, you had Blink 182, Sum 41. And then
a lot
it goes
of number bands. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it was that quick hit. And then you had the Strokes. Then it almost, as you said, it swings back to this like, hey, let's go back to when the band had a the in front of it.
Totally. And that was sort of that garage rock revival. There were a bunch. There was what was it? Like the Hives, all these bands, the Blanks, because what's old is new again. And it was a lot of that like lo-fi kind of simple DIY music, or at least meant to be sounding rough and garagey and sort of nostalgic.
Yeah.
The name sort of fit that as well.
Yeah. And then as we had talked about earlier, this I find it's the most logical, but it's also the most, I don't know if it's depressing, but creating band names for like search engine optimization.
Yeah.
Which just makes sense, right?
And you think about, I was trying to come up with the band I was thinking of earlier, but it's a very real issue. Like, so, there's the one I mentioned earlier was the band Churches, but the U is a V, almost like, like Roman, but they had originally been Churches with a U, and like no one could find their fucking webpage. So they're like, we have to revise this, which is actually, I thought, a pretty creative solution.
Yeah.
But some of those really generic names, it's really hard for anybody, and especially now when bands build such a following behind social media, you want to be able to pop. And if you're using a common word, even like Pavement, right? Yeah. Pavement's a band that I'm sure if they came 15 years later, they wouldn't have been called Pavement because
No.
that's like impossible to search.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those out there, and I think that landscape has changed quite a bit, and that's considered in a way that would have been a non-thought 10
Imagine
or 15
that.
years ago.
And
Yeah,
now you probably see like, hey, let's create a name. Let's go to Chat GPT. I want a band name.
totally. I've done it with work stuff. Give me 10 examples of titles for this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I guess with pavement, they'll have to be the pavements. Maybe
Yes.
that can
And
that.
Pavement. Yeah.
Um, well, so what makes for a good name?
To me, I think I was thinking about this a little bit. I think it almost has to be. I mean, there can be a lot of things. It can. Number one is you want it to be memorable, right?
Yep.
Number two is I think you'd like it to try to be evocative of your sound, and that's not always easy. But like when you hear, like I'll make one up, like Fugazi, right? To me,
Yeah.
that sounds like what the band is, right? It's like
Jeez.
very like organized noise
Yeah.
or whatever. But I think, and there's another band which actually weirdly changed their name. They were called Mandolin Orange, and I both get like the sound and like the color palette of like their vibe, like this,
Yeah.
very like people. And then they change it to Watch House, and I'm like, oh, no one, you're already famous. You don't need to reteach people. But there is an art to sort of like call yourself what you sound like, so you're
Yeah.
already evoking feelings from people before they ever hear you play a note. And I
Nice.
think that is really powerful. But as a table stakes,
Yeah.
you got to make it memorable. If someone hears a great
Yeah.
song, someone says, "Oh, that's blank," and you can't
Yeah.
remember, probably not a very good name.
In our previous episode, we talked about iconography and logotypes and whatnot. And I still say that thrash metal and the whole heavy metal genre nailed this. You're like, okay, Cannibal Corpse. It's not going to sound like the Carpenters.
Yes, you know exactly what you're getting with Cannibal Corpse. I would say
Exactly. Slayer, the
Yeah.
whole thing. It's so brilliant.
Like I don't even know that genre of music, but I already know what it sounds like somehow.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
you'll know what the font is, which
Yeah.
also has that, it's so integrated to the name. I think that as well. I think even the alliteration, how it comes across on your tongue, sounds
Totally.
great. Like, and we talk about, and this is even in branding, like two syllables, like Uber or Lyft. Those tend to be, better than, ride sharing app or ride share incorporated. But I find that naming process just so similar with lawyers and the whole trademark process. And there's a lot of examples out there that these story set are just they're just insane. What are some here that, as we go into the actual examples here, that you just loved?
Let's see here. I mean, we threw around a lot, and actually, I just wanted to touch on the point you just made about kind of there are a lot of commonalities with whether you're naming a band or a business or whatever. It's all about like, as much as it, but no band probably wants to admit this, it is like you got to think about your brand, right? You got to think about how you want to be perceived, etc. So let's look. I'll just jump into this list. What is one that is like funny and probably wouldn't have passed the sniff test if they knew they were going to be as famous as they were? The one that jumps off this list to me is Hootie and the Blowfish. Now, there's a couple funny elements of this. So, for those who don't, I mean, everybody knows Hootie and the Blowfish. If you say you haven't heard them, you're lying. 10 million albums sold of Cracked Review.
Guilty pleasure. Guilty pleasure.
Yeah, but they're named after two of their college friends at University of South Carolina. One of them looked like an owl. He had like an owly face, so he was Hootie.
Yeah.
And then another guy was the Blowfish because he kind of had a puffy face, and that was like a name to play a bar. But very quickly, as they started getting more popular, it kind of sounds like, Diana Ross and the Supremes. It has the same structure. So everybody's like, okay, so the lead singer's Hootie and the band are the Blowfish. Well, that's not at all the case, but it's way too late to put that genie back in the bottle now. So it's a funny name. It's very 90s, and it also makes no sense, and they hate it. So it really is like the trifecta of bad, good names, but you certainly don't forget it. So I think it's effective in that way. How about you? What strikes you on this list?
I think the one going through that it just kind of just made me laugh with the Ramones, right? Because here's a band, they all look the same with the hair and whatnot. And they weren't all brothers, and they weren't related.
They were very handsome.
Very, very handsome guys. And you just have this sense like the Ramones, okay, Joey Ramone, and it's but it actually came from Paul McCartney, whose genius just pervades everywhere.
We
It's
can't
just
get out of a podcast without
we
talking about him.
can't get about it. This is the D-Side's tribute to Paul. So this was Paul McCartney's alias when he would check into a hotel, right? Which famous people do. So you don't, so you can stay away from the paparazzi and whatnot. And his alias was Paul Ramon. And the band heard about this, and so they called him. But just to hear like Paul, and just to hear him like, or just to see him writing it down, Paul Ramon. I just there was something about it. I thought it was so funny and so random that your whole band is based on an alias.
It is. It was. I know that name was sort of meant to sound exotic. I also know that Paul. This is a Paul McCartney side story, but
Yeah.
he after they did Hard Day's Night, he was in disguise in that movie, and he kept the mustache and would go out as Paul Ramon with this mustache and do like a fake French accent. But the Ramones also has kind of a, they're I think from Staten Island. Is that right? They kind of has that Queens. It has that like hard edge to it. Like Ramon is like it's weirdly very New Yorky too. So it works. And it's also a great tribute. So that's
you imagine like some Italian American dude with slick back hair and like a leather jacket. Like, hey man, this is Ramon. Like that's
like the wrestler Razor Ramon. Kind of same vibe.
You don't want to mess with a dude named Ramon. Yeah. Another one that I thought was funny, and this actually came through a movie, Step Brothers, which with Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly, which is, if you haven't seen this movie, it is absolutely hilarious. And it was actually a sleeper, but now it's coming up as a cult favorite. Will Ferrell in the movie wears a shirt of a band from California here called Pablo Cruz.
Yeah.
And now this shirt, you can buy it on Amazon. It's become like a big deal. This band is one of the legends of yacht rock, right? They have a couple hits in the early 80s that I remember. And the name Pablo Cruz, most people thought it was a band member, maybe the founding member. And the logic was, they said, no, not at all. We just think it sounds like a person that we'd like to hang out with. Like Pablo just sounds like a cool name, and Cruz makes him seem really relaxing.
Easygoing, yeah. It definitely sounds like the perfect yacht rock name.
Exactly.
And I always thought it was one guy too.
Yeah. Exactly. And I just thought the logic, because I haven't heard about that in either branding or in corporate life. Like, oh, hey, I think we named this Swiffer because it just has a sound of like, but that was one I thought was one. What about you, Seth?
Yeah, going down, let's see. One of them we have here is Joy Division.
Okay.
Kind of a racy name a little bit. Joy Divisions are like basically like prostitution rings at Nazi concentration camps. And then even New Order has a bit of a like a Third Reichy kind of vibe to. They for years, and at one point they have recordings of maybe Himmler on one of their songs. Like they were big, like, we swear we're not Nazis, but we're gonna do a lot of like Nazi referencing. So that one is, I wouldn't say good, but it's funny enough if you don't know the meaning of it, which is something like very dark. The name kind of does go with the music. It's got a little bounce to it. Like, I never knew it until maybe 3 months ago that what the actual meaning was. And to me, I was always like, actually, that's a great name. Like that fits their sound and their vibe. I was wrong, but that was when we're learning the backstory. It was just like, why? And they were just like, we want to be provocative for the sake of being provocative. I'm amazed they didn't get talked about it.
I think if you had a different font, a lot of their covers were very that goth, almost fascist type. That's
the word I was looking for. Like they have a very fascist vibe for a band that's really not.
And their songs, like it had only one word. It was just like very minimal, very almost fabricated.
Brutalist.
Yeah, exactly. Like just like a communist building. But I some of these other ones, in terms of, as you said, it was different from what you thought. There's a band in the 70s, 10cc, which most people know from their hit I'm Not in Love. I'm not going to sing it for you, Seth, especially to you, but it's a song that most of you know. It's a 70s classic love song with a very soft, this like synthesizer, I don't know how to describe it.
They have a couple. Don't they do the Things We Do for Love too? Like they've got a handful of hits, songs you'd know.
Yeah, definitely. And so it was actually a very interesting name, 10cc. It's not often you'd see like a band in that 70s with that type of like almost like a measurement, but you would never believe what what this name is about. 10 cc is the amount of ejaculation, an average ejaculation in a man, and it's supposed to represent their potency. Like, that's
That is
insane.
yeah, and especially for their sound. It's not exactly the kind of band that in
Exactly.
any other way is trying to be provocative. But
Exactly. It's like
yeah.
soft rock. They're like, oh yeah, this is, and
I
I thought
also
that.
I wonder if it was any member of the band that went and did the research to validate that name. I don't know.
I'll tell you who isn't a fan is Peter North.
No. He's like, what a joke. What a
What a
joke.
joke. That's for amateurs.
Oh,
Okay, another one. We talk about them. This is my equivalent of Paul McCartney, Leonard Skinner. Okay, this is a really touching story. The band, which grew up in Jacksonville, at Robert E. Lee High School, of course, in the South. Their basketball coach was a guy, Leonard Skinner. And I guess he was a total bastard, made them cut their hair, like a total ball buster. And so their name is obviously an offshoot of that, of this guy. But what I like is at their concert, the Leonard Skinner, the original guy, came out and said, like, hey, I'm the original guy. My name's Leonard Skinner. And I guess the fans went crazy, and they developed a really close relationship. So it's kind of like your gym coach you hated, but by the end, he becomes your like your
once they
muse.
made his name famous, he was a big softie. Yeah, that
Yeah,
happens.
exactly. I
Yeah,
thought that was kind of cool.
yeah.
What are some other ones here that just blew your
So
mind?
one I thought was funny is there were two very famous bands at the same time in the late 60s that shared the same name across the country. Both of them were called the Warlocks. So this was a, kind of in a very late 60s name, the Blanks. Both
Mhm.
bands a little bit experimental. And a band in San Francisco had the name, and they had a manager who basically said, there's a band in New York that has the same name, very different sound. You guys need to change. That band became the Grateful Dead, which they literally pointed to they found the word grateful in the Bible,
Yeah.
in the dictionary, I think, and then built off that. And then the other band the original Warlocks that they took the name from became Velvet Underground. So these are two of the biggest bands of the late 60s that both shared the same, like, kind of generic, kind of goofy name. So it just goes to show even the most sort of creative, brilliant minds end up in the same kind of lame space with the name early on, that it takes time to
Yeah.
evolve. And I'm sure the second name sort of emerged as the sound developed too, right? Like sort
Yeah.
of more fitting of what the band became. Oftentimes the early version of what an artist sounds like is not really what they become known for. And I think that's the case in the case of both these bands, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, it's I couldn't imagine, hey man, let's go to the Warlock show. Like it's just the Grateful Dead, it's just part of, I don't know how to even,
Well,
it's just hard
especially
to
as
go back and think about like the font War, even having the name War in there. It's
yeah,
just,
it's so not them. And in like I think especially now, which when we talked about our iconography episode, like they
yeah.
are the kings of that, where they've
Oh,
got so much iconography. So, whether it's different permutations of, they've got Dead and Company, they've got The Dead, that like all these different things, people kind of build merchandising empires around the name and
yeah.
the images. And so to think they were ever something else is crazy, but they were for a couple years.
Um,
Any other ones on here?
well, I got to tell you, just to take a pause on names that I like, I won't say I'm disappointed in, but I never really like the names where it's just the name of the band. And obviously, and this goes back to Brian Payne. Brian, bro, what's up? Dave Matthews Band. Like, and all the creativity, that is the perfect name for their sound, which is unimaginative. What are we going to call this band? There's so many bands out there like Pink Floyd, The Who. Let's call it the Dave Matthews Band. Like,
Yeah, and do you want to know the origin story of that? Actually, I just learned this recently. They were never meant to be called that, and it was not, especially early on. It changed
yeah,
later, but early on they were very much a unit. Like all the guys kind of contributed
yeah,
equally, and they had booked a gig, and I think it was Leroy. Hey, I forget his last name. The guy who was basically the multi instrumentalist who played all the saxophone and all that stuff.
yeah,
And he had called the venue, and he's like, "Okay, we have Tuesday night. And they're like, what's the band name? He's like, well, just placeholder. It's Dave Matthews is our lead singer. And the guy wrote Dave Matthews Band on the sheet. That's what they're introduced as. And they like never changed it. And they
Really?
kind of didn't like it because even Dave Matthews himself was like, it's not really my band. So
Yeah.
it's not representative of how we operate. But for some reason it's stuck and the rest is history. And he's kind of the guy
Yeah.
and they're the backups when really that's not kind of the dynamic of the band in actuality. But yeah.
Yeah. I always found those like, come on, guys, you can do better.
Yeah.
But we talked a little bit about the search engine optimization. And when we talk about Led Zeppelin, right, this name, which it came from actually members of the Who, Keith Moon and John Entwistle, saying like their band, Jimmy Page's band, was going to drop like a lead balloon. But when they created LED, they did that so the DJs would not pronounce it as
Lead
lead.
Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought it was just kind of funny that they even think of that. Like, oh, yeah, we want to make sure that the branding is so important that we're going to just change it to LED.
Yeah, Led Zepp was SEO before SEO was SEO.
That's
before
how
the
hip,
internet.
how hit was that? Okay, another one. Steely Dan. Obviously, we got to say something about them. This name is perfect. It's a dildo mentioned in William Burroughs' book Naked Lunch. That's
Yeah,
what it is.
it's both skeezy and pretentious, which is like the perfect way to describe Steely Dan.
Dude, that is a great way to say it's so pretentious. It's this uber hipster book, and it's an obscure reference, which is Ultimate Steely Dan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I have to tell you, another we didn't talk about hip hop, which has some amazing names in there. And one of my favorites, and this I've been trying to integrate this into future product launches. This is EPMD, which is an old like 80s hip hop, kind of the pioneers of hip hop out in New York. This one I had no idea. For 20 years, I had no idea. Then one time someone said, oh, yeah, you know what that stands for? I'm like, what? It's Eric and Peter making dollars. I thought it was just great. Like, I just think it's like, yeah, man, this is what we do. We're making money.
Yeah. And you never question, like, what does it stand for? It's like, it sounds cool. EPMD. It even has like a little like bounce to the name.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And then we've got some bands that succeed in spite of what I would call a terrible name. So there's a band, like a jam band. And to be fair, that's like a different universe.
Yeah.
But they just sold out 2 nights here in Chicago and they're getting pretty big. And the band is called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Oh, geez.
And I thought the first time I heard it, I was like, that's a joke name. That is a name that you name your band when you're not famous and you have no intention of being famous.
Yeah.
And somehow, despite so one guy wanted to call the band Gizzard, and another one wanted to do a spinoff of the Lizard King, which is obviously Jim Morrison's nickname.
Yeah.
And somehow it turned into King. Yeah. But and fans called him King Giz or Giz.
Yeah.
But goddamn, that's like unwieldy and silly. It's like the opposite of cool, but somehow they've overcome it and they've got a huge following these days.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Seth. Rename a band that you think the new name would be so much cooler than their current name.
Oh, that's so you always give me questions like this. I don't have an answer. I'm not like I can consult my notes list here.
Yeah.
But if you have one, let me hear it and I'll try.
One that I thought and that I saw it and it was almost like a spoof, but it would be so much the band from Illinois, right? From Peoria, Illinois, REO Speedwagon, right? Which is kind of a corny name, to be honest. It's named after a car. It's like, yes, it is so Midwest. No offense to Midwest, but it's so what REO is about, which is like good old American music. I thought this name would be much better. REO Speed Dealer.
I like it. Now you're thinking.
Which would really reposition them as kind of, they would have just a totally different spin on their music, right? They're Midwest, but there's something really
that would be a good like metal cover band of REO Speedwagon songs.
Another one I thought was it was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was that movie in Disney back in this was Shitty Band.
That's a great cover band name, actually. There's a hip hop group called Chitty Bang, so they already have done the tribute to, but Shitty Band is pretty good, actually.
I thought that was good. But hey, really finish us off, Seth, with a name from your list. This is pretty fascinating.
All right,
I'm so
look,
stoked you did.
hold on. I just want to show you real quick. So,
Holy snap. Dude, you're gonna have to, can you publish this? Are you gonna
I don't
are
know.
you gonna make
It's
this
gonna
into a
cost you.
coffee?
I'll drop a few free ones
Give
here.
us
Let's see what we come
a
up with.
teaser. We deserve a teaser.
All right, I'll run down some here. Heavy Petting Zoo,
Oh.
Big Trash, Operation Spicy Lube, My Tattered Journal, a Spit Valve in the Grocers, Surrender to the Algorithm, Cocaine Kidney Pool, White Girls and Volvos, Ukrainian Social Club, Androgynous Snowman, Second Tier Treat, Turbo Shandy, Carpe Kittens, Large Wallace and his squad, Jizzy Stardust. Let's see. Horizontal Real Estate, Fantastic Floor, Exotic Rubber, Ample Foliage, Chocolate Subway, Crying at the Orgy, Sleepy Gaucho, Ukrainian Fulcrum, Wayward Snakes, Violent Man Bun, Castles in Brooklyn, Big Fog, Raging in Bosnia. It's always good to throw in an obscure country.
Dude.
Salt mines in Switzerland, Walpole Approach, Authorized Mingling, Gas Cap Fiasco. I'll stop with
this Seth, I have a newfound respect for you, bro. I knew you had your intelligence was off the charts, bro, but this is your greatest work. This
dozens.
I'm gonna say this right on the, you got to publish that, bro. That's a coffee table book right there.
Hey, the first couple are free, the rest are gonna cost you. This list
I gotta tell you, my favorite
valuable.
out of that, clear Crying at the Orgy. That's
I forget. Almost all
where
of those
did that come from, dude? I don't even know.
I don't remember. Almost all of them are like either someone heard something or read something or saw a sign, and so they're not totally random, but I don't remember the origin of that one.
Everyone, listen. We've been asking for interactivity, and this time we're going to demand it. Okay, so we want to hear your band name. If you have a list like Seth's or names that you're just creating off the fly, we want to hear about it. We're going to publish some of these lists. All right, Seth, I would say definitely trademark some of those, bro. We'll call Gary, our boy Gary. He can do it. He'll do a
get the lawyers on it.
Get the lawyers. Everyone, thank you so much to all the dads out there. We need a name for some dad bands, right? It's Father's Day. We're gonna think of something. We'll think of that tonight here and put these out. But everyone, thank you so much. Give us your names. Seth, one more. You got to just give us one more.
I'm gonna leave you. No, I'm gonna leave you. I'll tell you my. I'll share the rest of my names. We'll meet you guys at the Crying at the Orgy concert. How about that?
All right, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right. See you, Scott.